The NHL is about to enter 3 years of pure chaos. And this time it's serious. This isn't some clickbait title. This is probably the biggest thing to happen in years, and it's bound to seriously shake up the league. What we're talking about is the new proposed NHL salary cap. What teams will benefit from this? And what teams will this hurt? Could we see the first $20 million a year player? One thing I can say for sure is the league is going to get very chaotic over the next 3 years. So let's get right into it. Per Elliot Friedman, the NHL salary cap is projected to raise to $95.5 million next year in 25-26, $104 million in 26-27, and $113.5 million in 27-28. So what does this all mean, and why is it such a big deal? The NHL salary cap currently sits at $88 million. That means that every team in the NHL has the ability to spend up to that amount on their entire team roster. A player earning $8.8 million a year is currently earning 10% of their team's salary, assuming that team spends all the way up to the cap. Now, some teams don't spend up to the cap, usually rebuilding teams and some of the less valuable teams. Those teams are really going to struggle, but I'll touch on that a little bit later on. Let's look at the numbers. An increase from 88 to 113.5 over the next 3 years bears a total increase of 29%. That's unprecedented in the NHL and is honestly quite exciting for us NHL fans. These increases are the largest since the salary cap was implemented in 2005. So who does this increase benefit and who does it hurt? Well, first of all, it benefits the players, especially the ones who are due for new contracts in the next couple years. Remember how I said a player earning $8.8 million was earning 10% of their team's salary? Well, in 3 years after all these increases, a player earning $8.8 million will be earning 7.75% of their team's total salary. That gives teams a lot of room to sign new players or existing ones to larger contracts. Let's look at how much some contracts around the league will be worth after this change. For instance, all of a sudden, the once highest paid player in the league, which was a controversially high signing at the time, looks relatively small now. That player is one of the best in the world in Nathan MacKinnon. He earns $12.6 million a year over the next 6 years until 2031. His current contract accounts for 14.32% of his team's salary, a massive chunk. Now in 3 years, his contract will account for only 11.1% of his team's salary. If we take that 11.1%, we can see how much his contract is valued relative to today's $88 million salary cap. His current contract in 3 years will be equivalent to $9.77 million today, which would be an absolute steal for a player of his caliber. Now, let's look at some other players around the league and see how their contracts will change. The most recent signing in the league was for Washington Capitals goalie Logan Thompson. He's having a breakout season with the Caps and is one of the best goalies in the league right now. His contract already felt like a bargain for the Caps at $5.85 million a year over 6 years. That accounts for 6.65% of the current $88 million salary cap. In 3 years, his contract will be equivalent to $4.54 million a year. A great deal for the Caps if he can keep playing at this level. Let's look at another goalie, and the most recent blockbuster signing in the league, in Igor Shesterkin of the New York Rangers. If we use the same calculations, his 8-year, $11.5 million a year contract will be equivalent to $8.92 million in 3 years. Which is amazing for the Rangers. William Nylander of the Toronto Maple Leafs $11.5 million a year will also be equivalent to $8.92 million in 3 years. Sebastian Aho of the Carolina Hurricanes $9.75 million a year will be equivalent to $7.56 million. Cole Caulfield of the Montreal Canadiens $7.85 million a year will be equivalent to a mere $6.09 million. All of these long-term contracts will become massive steals. You can see where I'm going. If a team has their core locked up long-term, they're going to be at a huge advantage. And if they don't, well, it's going to be an interesting time for them. Let's look at players whose contracts are expiring and will be signing new ones soon. For them, this cap increase is the biggest win. And for teams needing to sign players, well, I bet they wish they would have signed them earlier. Firstly, Mitch Marner of the Toronto Maple Leafs. He is due to sign a new contract next year. Boy, is he and his agent glad they waited for this news. Marner currently sits at 4th in the league in points and will possibly become the highest paid player in the league. Estimates for his new contract were around $12.5 million. However, these estimations were based on the $88 million salary cap, or a future where the cap rises, but not nearly at the 29% rate at which we're going to see. If Marner was planning on signing a $12.5 million contract, that would be equivalent to $16 million per year relative to the new $113.5 million cap. It would become a contract that has never been seen before in the NHL. Now, another question we need to ask ourselves is, will we see the first $20 million a year player in the NHL? It wasn't that long ago that Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews were signing $10 million a year contracts, and that felt absolutely ludicrous. But could we see a $20 million player with these increases? Well, the best player in the league might be able to fetch that amount, or something very close to it. If Mitch Marner could be making upwards of $16 million, what could we see with Connor McDavid's current contract expiring in 2026? Estimates have the NHL best Connor McDavid around $15.5 million a year, which was according to the $88 million cap, with some speculation of a rising cap. That would be equivalent to exactly $20 million a year of the $113.5 cap, which we could see signed as early as this offseason. McDavid will surely become the highest paid hockey player of all time. Other notable players with expiring contracts include fellow Oiler Evan Bouchard, recently traded Mikko Rantanen, Leafs John Tavares, Islanders Noah Dobson, and many young players signing their first large contracts in Blackhawks Connor Bedard, Stars Wyatt Johnston, Devils Luke Hughes, and Utah's Logan Cooley. For contenders in the league, this news is shocking. General managers will be scrambling to try and sign players and make trades. It gives GMs much more leverage over the next 3 years. Maybe a GM can now sign that superstar they've been wanting to, but that also means other GMs can now sign them too, completely shocking the market. We are going to see some ridiculous contracts over the next 3 years. It's not a great time to be a buyer, but at the same time, it's not a great time to be a rebuilding team either. However, the real biggest losers of this news are teams that have an internal cap, meaning the team's owners don't allow their team to spend as much money as the cap allows. This increase will make it even tougher for them to compete. For example, a less valuable team may have an owner that only allows them to spend up to $75 million of the $88 million cap. Well, now they will only be able to spend $75 million of the $113 million cap, making it even tougher for them to compete. These teams are most notably the Anaheim Ducks, Columbus Blue Jackets, and Buffalo Sabres, but will include more teams as the cap rises. Also, many rebuilding teams have an internal cap since they assume they won't be competitive during their season. This may prolong the time it takes to complete a rebuild, as a team may be unable to perform or take that next step with their internal cap against teams spending up to the cap. This could create a potential discrepancy between the most valuable teams and the least valuable teams in the league. For any rebuilding team who hasn't locked up their core, this news is also not great. Why is that? Because the young players they have will be looking for long-term contracts, and this just made it so teams will have to sign them at much higher rates than before, which will make it tougher to compete against teams who have their core locked in long-term on contract deals. Let's look at the Anaheim Ducks again, who are rebuilding. They are in the process of taking that next step into locking up their core. Over the next few seasons, they'll have to sign Leo Carlsson, Mason McTavish, Cutter Gauthier, and many more. These players can now ask for absurd amounts, and if the Ducks don't comply, some other teams will have the leverage to sign them, especially ones with many of these contract steals that we're talking about. Same goes for other rebuilding teams like the Blackhawks and Sharks. In my opinion, there's a sweet spot. Teams who will benefit are the ones in the last leg of the rebuild and have most of their core recently locked up. Most notably, the Red Wings, Senators, and Habs. They will be able to have that same leverage as a contending team, but without being in the market to make irrational buys like those contending teams will have to do in the next 3 years to win a cup. Teams that stay patient will have the best long-term outcome when the market resettles in a few years. Also, contending teams who have most of their core locked up, like the Florida Panthers, who have Barkov, Tkachuk, Reinhart, Verhaeghe, and Lundell all locked up until at least 2030, will be able to stay relevant for many years. Those players account for $40 million of the Panthers' $88 million cap hit, meaning the Panthers would have their core locked up until 2030 for what would be the equivalent of $28.5 million in today's cap hit, where a team like the Jets have many core contracts expiring in the next couple years, gearing up for a wild ride for them and their fans. If this video gets enough likes and comments, I'll make a part 2 going over how these changes will affect every specific team in the league. As you can see, these changes are bound to completely shake up the league almost immediately. We are bound to see unprecedented signings, some absolutely crazy contracts, some current contracts that will turn into the biggest steals in league history. Teams will be scrambling to make trades and sign players, especially over the next 3 years while this is all going into effect. Get ready for the ride. It's about to be a fun one for us fans. If you stayed this far into the video, I just want to say thank you. This is my first video on this channel, and I'm excited to make more. And hey, maybe you can be someone who says you're an OG of this channel, you know, if we blow up. And like I said, if I get enough support, I'll make a part 2. So like, sub, and comment. Thank you for watching. Love you all. Bye.